Hi, I'm Jack with healthofmyhome.com. I know in these past few videos I was talking about making your house airtight. And it often leads to a question, wait, so what will I be breathing? And that's a great question. Let's imagine you're in your house. You close all the doors and windows and stay there for a day, week, month. How soon will you suffocate? It seems like a ridiculous question with an obvious answer. We all know that the answer to it is never. That's right. Our houses have enough airflow in them to keep the air inside fresh enough for us to not notice it usually. But where is the air coming from? What moves it around and how much of it is moving through? Let's examine this closer. When you start talking to people in the construction field about it, pretty soon you hear a phrase, a house needs to breathe. It describes the principle in addressing airflow in most houses built in this country until pretty recently. And even now, many people who build houses are operating by the same mantra, especially if they've been building houses for a long time. The phrase, a house needs to breathe, means that houses were built intentionally quite leaky. I'm just imagining how during framing someone misses a nail or leaves a gap somewhere and goes, a house needs to breathe, and keeps on going. There was no testing of how much a house is breathing. Builders would just make sure there are plenty of holes left. So houses have a lot of tiny gaps, cracks, and holes all around that the air is just moving through. It doesn't look like it, but there are a surprising amount of holes in a typical house unless it's been very intentionally sealed. These days, we do testing and see how many holes there are in a house. Generally, we find that if we add all those gaps together, they equal to an open window. That's a window in your house that's open year-round. And based on the house, it's a big window or a smaller one. A house needs to breathe turn out to be a pretty effective way of bringing fresh air into a house. I'm not familiar with a single case of anyone suffocating in their house due to lack of oxygen. Even the urban legend of the guy who got Darwin Award for dying from his own flatulence while sleeping in a small room ended up being fictional. So how much air is actually moving through a house and what's the good amount? I won't go into depth with ventilation formulas here, but as a rule of thumb, you can imagine that we are aiming for a third of an air in the house being exchanged every hour. Another way to put it is we want the whole volume of air in a house being changed 8 times every 24 hours. If there are a lot of people in there, then even more. This seems like quite a substantial amount of air, and probably more than I would have guessed if I knew nothing about ventilation. But from the test I routinely do, I see that most older homes have more than a third of their volume of air moving through them. And particularly leaky houses might have the whole volume of air being exchanged every hour or even more. You might wonder, what are the forces that make the air move in and out of your house? We usually think of the wind as the first force. But turns out the primary driving force is caused by temperature difference between inside and outside of our house. In the winter, as you warm up the air in your house, it becomes more buoyant and floats up and is pushing up, trying to find any pathways it can squeeze out into the attic. As it floats up, it creates low pressure by the bottom of the house, which means that the house is now sucking air through the floor. And if we live above a crawl space, that's where most of the air will be sucked from. And that's probably the worst source of air anywhere around a house. Somewhere in the middle, between the ceiling and the floor, the pressure difference between inside and outside is neutral, and therefore our house is not really exchanging much air through these areas, even if there are openings, like say openings around windows. In the summer, if we use AC, airflow is exactly reversed. Cool air is pushing down and the house is sucking super hot air from the attic, also a really bad source of air. So the house needs to breathe mantra, as we're learning, is effective, but creates some major downsides that we usually don't notice because we think they're caused by something else. Here are the 5 downsides. 1. The air that comes in usually comes from places with the worst possible air, like crawl spaces if there is one, or an attic where if you use AC. Air quality might be compromised. 2. Most houses built this way have way too much air moving through them and losing way too much heat and money unnecessarily. Usually the older the house, the more air moves through it. Also, the colder it is outside, the more air moves through, so you have the most heat loss on the days when you want it the least. 3. There is pretty much no control over indoor environment in houses operating under this principle. Whatever happens, happens. 4. It feels drafty, since there is usually way too much air moving through. Also, those are usually under-insulated houses, which, as we've learned, does not feel comfortable. 5. Warm indoor air moving to cold spaces like an attic is likely to cause condensation, mold problems, and ice dams. So in light of all of those issues, our thinking has been evolving. Now we have a new motto that we use to build and retrofit houses. And the new motto is build tight, ventilate right. This motto resolves all of the issues with our antiquated way of thinking. And what it means is probably what you're imagining. We work to make a house as airtight as possible, and then installing a machine that brings in just the right amount of air into the house from clean sources. As we remember, for most houses, it's about 1/3 of the volume of the house every hour. And these systems are meant to be running for as long as the house is standing. So naturally, there is a price to pay. The price is twofold. 1, it certainly costs more to make a house airtight and install the ventilation system, so the upfront costs are higher. But an even more critical part of this plan is 2, maintenance. Those systems need to be maintained. It really helps if people who live in the house know what they have, how it functions, and how to deal with it. Unfortunately, rarely do we see all that being effectively communicated to the home occupant. There are a lot of benefits to be had with this new way of thinking, but the homeowner buy-in is the critical piece. This is a part of the reason why I'm so excited to make this video series. I see engineers designing good products and inventing good new ways of improving our houses, but too often, due to lack of communication to the homeowners, those ways can become not just ineffective, but potentially create even bigger problems than we had before. Because if we make a house substantially airtight, add ventilation, but it stops working after some time, we can start running into poor air quality, moisture, and mold problems. Those are worse than the inefficiency that we had with old leaky homes. I don't want to scare you unnecessarily. Since you're watching this video, there is a very good chance you're the kind of person who will figure out a good way to make your house operate optimally. When people hear about machines that will run constantly in their house, they sometimes worry about the cost of operation. Yet this is not really much. Most of these cost only $1 to $5 a month to run, including the cost of the heat that we'll lose with the stale air. Yet they allow significantly more savings in heating and air conditioning bills. They offer even more savings in health benefits, but those are harder to quantify. If your house was built in the last 20 years or so, it might have a mechanical ventilation system. Otherwise, most likely it doesn't have any, and is a house needs to breathe kind of house. Neither one of these is right or wrong. They're just two different systems and have different results. In my opinion, a new ventilated house with the ventilation system shut off is worse than an old leaky one. At least the old one operates as intended. If you have something like this, or if you find a box with 4 ducts coming off it that looks like an octopus, your house is likely designed to be ventilated, and it's really important that those systems are checked and maintained regularly. Also, if you have a bath fan that just seems to be running all the time and you can't shut it off, or turns on every hour and runs for a while, that's probably a form of whole house ventilation systems. You want to learn more about how it works and how to maintain it. I will talk more in depth about various ventilation systems in the later videos. In the next one, let's look at the first half of the new motto, build it tight. It is critical to air seal a house if we want to control our indoor environment and to improve its efficiency, comfort, resilience, and health. This was Jack with healthofmyhome.com. Thank you for watching.